Hmm.
The
Okay.
storm coming. We had a storm about 10 days ago, and it was
Yeah.
like there's still a million people don't have power or something, or whatever. And then there's another one coming in now. It says here it's 8 degrees, but I don't think. I think it's plummeted way lower than 8. Because I'm very rarely cold, and I'm like, "Ugh."
Mm. Well, here it's 0 degrees at the moment.
Yeah.
And I totally feel you. I start functioning after anything higher than 24.
I don't mind cold. I'm actually kind of cold friendly. I prefer cold over sweaty hot. But this is actually like, brr. But I've got a little infrared heater. Actually, I'll put the other heater on as well. No, the other one's on. Jesus. So I think literally the storm must have come in the last hour and then taken the temperature down about 10 degrees.
Oh shit.
It was quite mild this morning. It was rainy, but
Yeah.
walk around in a shirt, totally fine weather. And now it's brr.
Okay.
So what's
Well,
the format or the
well,
vibe?
well, well, the format is I ask you a leading question, and
Yeah.
off you go. You riff
Yeah.
on that for however long you feel is good, or until I don't understand something, and then I just come in with
Oh,
questions.
live right now. Okay, getting
And I,
it.
and I, and there might be people coming in to listen in and maybe also ask some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we will transcribe all of this
Mm-hmm.
uh, and add it to a Roam graph, which you will also get access to with conversations like this with people like uh, Tyson Yunkaporta and
Yeah.
many others.
Yeah.
And so I reckon there's about 70 hours of by now, because I'm merging two Roam graphs, about 70, 80 hours of transcribed material there. So people can search and find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the big question is, how are we going to save the world? Is that the kind of summary
Well,
overall question?
on a very here now-ish and personal level, in what ways are you contributing towards making the planet a good place
Okay.
for all life, not only
Mhm.
humans? But I think that's implicit anyway. So that's the leading question.
And so you
Yeah.
want so do you want more about my particular specific work, like
Mhm.
projects that are happening, or do you
Yes.
want more like my approach
Well, it
and
so
how it
so
informs the projects?
so you can play a ping pong between what's your configuration, who are
Mhm.
you, what is the lens you're looking at things through. I think
Yeah,
that's helpful.
I think it's very
Then
helpful.
what do you see far out? What's the horizon you're working towards?
Yeah.
Um, to frame, and then within there is things that you do, right? The line between you and the future, there's things that you actually actively do, and then we
Mhm.
we zero in on these. That's what we can do.
You don't want to hear about my composting.
Well, I have a lot to learn about composting.
I'm joking. I'm joking. Well, I'm not joking, but I'm joking.
I'm even crap at bokashi, but okay, that's another thing.
Okay,
Okay,
got it.
so
I'm just going to move you so you're right by my camera.
okay,
Okay.
my friend,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, and it's amazing to see the books behind you, because I know these books are all in your mind and more.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why you're here, because you have a fascinating mind.
Thank you.
And so, what I would like us to do, or me, I will sit back and listen and enjoy
Okay.
while you go into the configuration of yourself. Who are you?
My
And and
constellation.
then and then
Hmm.
project outward. What
Okay.
is that you moving towards? What do you want to see in the world for your seventh generation offspring?
Right.
Then what is it that you do now, here now, to make that happen?
Okay.
Then we will just ease into a natural conversation.
Okay. How long
Off
do you
you
want
go.
to? How
Stage
long
is
would you want
yours.
to do this for? Give me a sense of the length.
Whatever. Whatever.
And I'm going to purposefully mix some quite highbrow thinking and some very practical thinking, and I'm going to try and
Okay.
find the places between them. And I think that's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
a good way
One
in.
one caveat at 4 o'clock
German.
German time.
Yeah.
Jim Rutt will join this Zoom call. So if we make it all the way to there, then we'll be more people. But
Fine.
yeah, no, there's no
I don't
limit.
think so. I'll run out of steam probably eventually, though I can talk for quite a long time. So let me give you a sort of very quick where I've come from to where I'm going to, just to get people situated in my strange world of problem solving. So currently I work in the spectrum between personal transformation and systemic world transformation. And my entire life's work has focused in on that connection between our own individual felt sense, emotionality, thoughts, beliefs, assumptions, behaviors, habits, addictions, and those that crystallize as a collective in the form of the system, the economic system, the social system, the structure of business, how businesses models work, how societal models work, governance models, economic models. So my kind of world goes from the micro within of that specific label of what that embodied felt sense intuition is, and how to nuance that, discern that, become precise with that, but then not lose its emotive, intuitive power within, right through to, well, how do we then look at healthcare or education or the finance system at a 9+ billion person, presumably one planet future? I'm not going to get interested. I'm not interested in Mars and Venus. No, I'm interested in Mars and Venus, but not Mars and Venus. And we'll maybe come on to that at some point. So, and I'm very passionate about correcting what I see as one of modernity's biggest issues, which is compartmentalizing the inside of us. So if you go into a bookshop, you will see personal development, personal growth, spirituality, psychedelics, blah, 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 in one area. And then you'll see social change, social justice, ecological justice, sustainability in another area, and then another area might see entrepreneurship and business and whatever, and then anthropology. And obviously I totally admire the value of that categorization and that micro creation of micro areas, and the German model of learning, and the PhD idea, and then the postdoc, and then the postdoc, and then you're writing about one pixel of human knowledge for the rest of your life. I had that option to go into pixelated learning knowledge, and I resisted it every time. And sometimes that has a grief for me. I didn't do a PhD. I didn't even a cross-functional multi-subject PhD. I didn't go into that world. I stayed as a pixelated, as a video level. 4K, 8K level. But I understand the pixels, or a lot of the pixels, and you have to understand pixel and movie, and it's been challenging because I've had to go against the prevailing wind, which is, so here's your book. So my first book, I sent it to the people who first published The Power of Now. I was recommended to them by friends in the area, California, and it was called The Inner Revolution. I never actually finished writing it because it wasn't bought, so I ended up doing something else. And it was The Inner Revolution was the idea of social and ecological revolution created by individual revolution. And the feedback from them was, we don't do politics and social change stuff. We do spirituality and consciousness. And then you send the same book to people who do social changes and political blah blah economics. They're like, oh, what's this whole spirituality, consciousness, weird stuff you're talking about? Why are you talking about trauma? Why are you talking about enlightenment? Not the enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment. And so it's always been this kind of challenge for me of how do you work in a world that wants to separate these different forms of knowledge. And I fundamentally believe if we're going to make it into the future in anything like a non-full breakdown, meltdown of human society, and I think there'll be some of that, but I think we can consciously choose it, and we can transition rather than implode. Just as you can as an individual. You don't have to reach rock bottom. you can preempt rock bottom, but I will come onto that in my theory of transformation. I'm going to take some notes what I want to come back to, circle back to, or double click on.
Before you go there, I'd be super interested in getting to know more about the Nick that became to be that Nick that can hold all of these things that you were just describing.
I will come back into me bio in a second.
Okay.
I just want to complete this circle that if we're going to make it to this place, we have to bring all these things together back again that were once split. And that means the schisms within us between mind and heart, between intellect and intuition. And I wrote a whole book on that one point. But we also have to bring back all these different knowledge buckets without losing our minds, because it's so much. And that's actually to point to your questions. How do you hold all this inside? And it's, I have to say, an uncomfortable experience on a daily basis. It's not an easy experience because I'm also choosing what to let go of all the time, because you can't hold it all, or what not to study anymore. Like, so I have, at any one time, I have the London Review of Books and the New York Review of Books, which are both reviews of the most recent most interesting academic things, plus some essays on the Palestine-Israeli situation or Bitcoin or whatever it is that's important. New Yorker, Eon magazine, all the stuff that came out this week. I have a bunch of academic papers on the neuroscience of testosterone or the neuroscience of trauma, interpersonal neurobiology, whatever. All to be read that month, plus a bunch of books. And I have to actively sacrifice on a daily basis when I'm not going to read, which is painful to a generalist who is trying to see all the pixels. And then at the same time, sacrifice what me as an expert practitioner is not going to be an expert practitioner on anymore. And I wanted to do all of it and I can't. And I'm realizing that I'm about to be 50 and I have to really work out what the next 20 years for me is going to be like. And not just fall into it and fall over it, and at the same time try and help the world at the next 20 years. And I feel they're interlinked. When you get to this kind of consciousness of personal right through to social transformation, you realize that you and the world are the ontogeny, phylogeny. You are your, neurotubules of your development from an embryo and the world's development are somehow entwined. And you can listen for that and to find where that's the intuitive piece. You can align yourself with that and both play a part in it, create it, and not stop it as well, and not get in the way of it. So now let's reverse back. How do I get to this crazy state of emotional, intellectual challenge? I was a bright kid. From a divorced, traumatized, Holocaust surviving family. So from a quite early age, and my father's a behavioral psychologist, and my mum's a humanist psychotherapist. It didn't last. But you can see within that already that I was given this opportunity to bring together the feminine healing, not say Jungian, but certainly post-Freudian Winnicott style, touchy-feely feminine. And my mum's a beautiful community leader, carer for everyone. And then my father's this super bright, brilliant, actually, I would say, intellect with a more behaviorist, Skinnerian, and postmodern approach. So he didn't get stuck in Skinnerian psychology, but also probation officer, also taking care of the world, had me writing letters for Amnesty International when we were in the early 80s for prisoners of conscience. We didn't watch TV much. We were doing stuff with the world. He went through a big Marxist stage, which I picked, I was picking all this stuff up, and they divorced and didn't really spend time together, but I had to live with this inheritance, right? And then from an early age, I was put into psychotherapy, age 13, for my own personal trauma and existential challenges, which was amazing from the existential space for that, whilst also moving towards studying medicine and being a psychiatrist, scientist psychiatrist. So these two strands. Then I went through a kind of conversion into atheism. I fell out of the Jewish experience age 14, 15. Was like, whatever it is, a personal God is not it. Don't know what is it, but that isn't it. Went to Cambridge, studied medicine. Still were thinking to be a psychiatrist, but a hard, scientific, evidence-based form of psychological engagement. Because I didn't know what else there was really. And I hadn't experienced psychotherapy as particularly comprehensive and obsessed with the minutiae of, so why did you sit in this chair, not this chair? Let's talk about that for the next 12 hours of your life. And I was like, seriously? Got to medical school, was still overwhelmed, still had personal stuff, loads of trauma and depression and whatever, clinical depression and fibromyalgia I was diagnosed with at medical school. And then quite an interesting occurrence occurred. I was given the opportunity to study for a year the history and philosophy of science. So it's super meta on science. And most scientists don't study that. They don't even know what science is. They do it, but they don't know how to describe what it is and isn't, and what it can and can't tell you, which is why you get scientism gushing into all areas of human consciousness in an area where the methodology isn't designed to solve that problem. Or understand that challenge or understand that phenomenon. So that blew my mind. Plus I was studying the history of scientific thought, where I was seeing research and evidence about what you would call breakthroughs, revolutions. So the Thomas Kuhn work and then the sociology of science. And this is all partly post-rationalizing. I didn't really know it blew my mind. And for the first time in my life, having gone through so far a very elite academic journey. So I'm 22 and I'm literally running every morning at 8 a.m. to the university library because I had to catch up. It was the third year. It was basically a master's level course with all these other people who had done philosophy for 2 years already, or sociology or anthropology. I'd done none of that. So I was having to read, and I was reading Lacan, and then I was reading Foucault, and then I was reading Baudrillard, and then I was reading Kant and Hegel, and I was trying to build myself a foundation. Almost lost it, I should add. So that was an early warning signal that if you try and hold all this stuff without a map, no bueno. So I knew I had to build a map for myself.
What does it mean, almost lost it?
I almost lost it psychologically because
how can you go into that a little bit?
I'll give you a little double click on this moment. Yeah. I'm in the university library at Cambridge, beautiful building, very erotic actually, I think. And I mean that in a sort of divine eros sense, libidinal energy, and also a cheeky sexual sense. Beautiful place. Every book that's ever been published in English is in there. And you know that when you're in there. It's one of the reference libraries of the world, like the Library of Congress. And I had little post-it notes of little memes. We would call them now like philosophical memes. And particularly the paper I was doing on the philosophy of psychoanalysis, which is really interesting because it's a place where the inner and the outer collide. Science and consciousness collide. But in a despiritualized way. They were trying to despiritualize it. They were trying to take away the noumenal and the emotional and the feeling. And I was trying to keep it all up here rather than embodying it, integrating it down here. Because that's what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to pluck knowledge and go. And I remember feeling dizzy, like a feeling of a dizziness, which I now know is what happens to me before a transformation.
Okay.
Where my old worldview is being dying, and my new worldview is birthing inside me. And now that I work as a coach practitioner, I know that's a common feeling, but we don't like it because no one tells us what it's like, and we don't have initiation ceremonies to help us go through it. And I felt like I was losing my mind in a way that I'd spotted in previous versions of this. So the one before that, the big one before that, was sitting in Africa in the middle of nowhere, being a teacher of science teacher, 18 years old, looking at the stars, having like a full existential crisis of what it means to be alive. And so I knew this experience, had all these little post-it notes, and literally about 200 of them, because I had the exam the next day. So I'm like, so how does Lacan work with Charcot, who is like a hypnotherapy, protagonist of Freud, precursor of Freud's, work with medieval ideas of melancholy versus ancient ideas. And yeah, but I held it together. Ironically, it was the only paper that I didn't get a first in. And it was the one I loved the most. You know, it was like the one because I wanted to know all of it. And I didn't have the time in that year to integrate it all. So it was all messy. But I wrote and then I wrote my thesis on this. I didn't really spot this as a kind of leitmotif until I was writing a book 5 years ago, which was like a philosophical memoir. But I wrote my thesis on scientific narratives of evolutionary theory. And the crossover between science, religion, evolution, psychoanalysis, all around. I got into neurotheology. Like, it was a kind of crazy precursor of the rest of my life, actually trying to reconcile these different things. And the thesis was called Noble Lies, which is a term from Plato, which are basically the cherished assumptions we hold that stop us, that then stop us having breakthroughs, having transformations. That was kind of like, whoa. Then I was going to do a PhD in history of thought, which would have been obviously a good place to go in America. So I applied for the Americas. Harvard, there was an anthropology program by Paul Rabineau in Berkeley. There was a history of consciousness program at UC Santa Cruz. Sort of multidisciplinary, sort of intellectual history sort of stuff. And then I had to do something for the year, and I'd left medical school, deciding I didn't want to do that, but through a crisis, through a transformational crisis of my own health and well-being. But I just didn't. It's hard to leave medicine when you're in it. It's not a world that people want you to leave, particularly when they've put like 5 years of money into your development, and you've taken a place that someone else could have had. Blah blah blah. You know, it wasn't an easy transition. And then my father had worked in advertising and said, "Why don't you do this job called planning?" Which sounds like a very innocuous job. It's actually like a psychology and philosophy of consumer behavior job, but you also have to strategize a solution to this consumer behavior. It's an incredible skill that only very few people know about, that it exists. Creative strategy, also it's called these days. And I thought I'd do it just while I was going to have go to do PhD, but actually loved it. And why I loved it, I now know, is because it was a practitioning job that's informed by philosophy, psychology, history, etc. So you're doing quant research, qual research, focus groups, ethnographic research. You're doing surveys. You're looking at market data. You're looking at data from apps, if people have got that. And then you're trying to crunch it all into, where do we want this company to be in 5 years? So it's a profoundly challenging job and profoundly interesting and exciting. And then you have to create a brand and business strategy to capture that consumer insight, that consumer thought, and both take it and then create a new version. I was working for PlayStation, working for Nike, amazing brands, having the time of my life in London, ... Ended up then creating an innovation coming out of advertising because they couldn't solve a bigger problem, which is, so advertising's brief is create communication and branding that takes consumers somewhere new, where they're going to buy your product ultimately. And what I realized people were looking for was, we don't have the products for them. We've got a brand, but we don't have the right product for the next 10 years. We don't have the right business model. We're in products, we want to be in services. We're in services, we want to be in technologies. We're in technology, we want to be software as a service. We're in software as a service, but we want to be subscription, whatever it is. They didn't have and advertising was the place you would come to for that, because at that point in the late 90s, there didn't exist a market called innovation consulting. It didn't exist. So me and a guy set up a company that would become, we didn't know it, an innovation consultancy, specializing in disruptive innovation, which then chimes back with this history of science. And how do you go from from Newtonian mechanics to quantum mechanics? How do you create that breakthrough? Because it took 38 years or something like that to have that mindset shift. But the data was the data. They hadn't changed. The model, the worldview changed. So how do you create worldview changes like that by design, not by, as Niels Bohr said, waiting for old scientists to die so the new ideas can come through. Right? How do you create the death of the old and the rebirth of the new in a way that a multinational corporation can go, yeah, I'll sign a check for that. So it can't be mystical. It can't be transformational. It can't be too scary. So I then spent about 7-8 years trying to design a process, which I still run, by the way. So this is not like old, which is now better. Obviously, 23 years of work on it. How do you design a process for death, safe death, of old assumptions, old business models, of which a company has become famous and rich from, and the individuals within it have become powerful, status recognized for the old model. Birth newness from somewhere, which we'll come on to. Where's it come from? Form it into concepts, form it into prototypes, pilots, MVPs, test the wazoo out of it while still not shrinking it away back to the old world. At scale, get paid for it, make it feel good, make it feel safe, but not stop the disruptive power of the new idea coming out into the world.
That's the hardest one.
Exactly. The other stuff is easy. And then how do you sell that when you're competing with McKinsey and whatever? And that was an amazing trip through also starting a business as a 24-year-old, having to have staff, having to have structure as ourselves, having to go through the journey of our own entrepreneurial, who are we? And then that all kind of imploded because I imploded for the last time in my life. Touch some wood. Because I still hadn't stabilized my own sense of self. I was still nominally an atheist at this point. And what I was definitely was fervently anti-New Age. I could not get with New Age branding, packaging, fonts. I mean, literally to that level, like even now I look at something in a New Age font, I'm like, guys, come on. You don't have to signal like that. We can signal more intelligently and more interestingly. So I imploded, but it wasn't just an implosion. This is why I think the universe. I have a theory of transformation I'm going to share with you, and I'm giving some foreshadowing and some breadcrumbs of it. One of them is that I believe that if we don't choose proactively transformation will happen to us. And we call that breakdown, we call that burnout, we call that depression, we call that crisis, emergency, whatever. And we can proactively work with that same process to avoid all the painful, not the painful bits, the suffering bits. We can avoid the suffering, and we can proactively arm ourselves internally and externally for the painful bits. And innovation's painful. So I had this burnout experience, entrepreneurial burnout, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Sunday, I was still thinking through stuff, building a business, 30, 40 staff, clients, flying around the world, boom. But part of the boom was not just my internal combustion engine needed a service. It was also, as I describe it now, my heart calling me back from mental elevation, escalation, back into A, my body and embodied thinking, but B, a flavor of that was we were helping companies create billion-dollar business models and products without any, even though we were like kind of positive, new economy, digital emancipation type vibes, we didn't have many lenses for purpose, for sustainability, for social justice, for not using up carbon, chewing out carbon, using up cobalt, whatever it is, right? And I realized that this company that I created couldn't continue its growth without a fundamental transformation of its consciousness and its business model, which I don't think we could have done and kept 30, 40 staff on budget, because even now there aren't that many briefs going out for sustainable innovation, regenerative innovation, systemic innovation. And this was 16 years ago, right? So we couldn't maintain a corporate innovation consultancy.
You couldn't disrupt yourselves.
we could disrupt ourselves, but not the business model, and keep everyone on and also it just took time. That's why I realized it took time. So basically, shut down the business. We exited. We were going to sell to a big company, that a well-known name that you would know. And I decided I didn't want to do another 3 years of this. I needed to reboot. So I took some time out, traveled, had a quite profound spiritual enlightenment experience, which I then needed to integrate into my scientific worldview, which has taken 16 years to do, or about 14 years to do, and a book to really crystallize it. So I write books for others, but also for my own integration. They're like a most amazing way of integrating your thinking when you're a generalist, particularly. And I started a social enterprise because I discovered this idea of social entrepreneurship. I was like, oh my God, I can still be an entrepreneur, but do it for the love, do it for the world, do it for the people. Was a member, one of the first members of what is now called the Impact Hub in London back in the day. Thought about working for like Amnesty as a strategist or whatever, but they were just so far behind in terms of corporate strategy and innovation is and has always been so far ahead of governmental, public and social innovation. Set up a social enterprise. Set up two, actually. One was to do social innovation. Could I take the corporate innovation process that I'd birthed, created, crafted? It's so beautiful. I do believe it's the best, most powerful problem-solving approach in the known universe. And I can explain why at some point later on in this chat. Could I get governments, local or central government, or UN supranational, or Amnesty, World Wildlife, Oxfam, whatever, to leverage this toolkit to solve fundamental human problems where there's not just a corporate unmet need, but an actual suffering point. And the difference between a corporate view of a pain point and a psychospiritual, compassion-led view of a pain point, a little bit apart. And so a corporate pain point is, if you've got wet armpits, we can make you feel ashamed, and then you're going to buy some deodorant. That's $1 billion business there straight away. A psychospiritual, compassion-led, non-dual approach to a pain point is separation from each other, lack of meaning, deaths of despair, just poverty, child abuse, slave labor, whatever. And those are governmental or non-governmental NGO concerns, but they are often not sophisticated enough to use this toolkit. Still, this is now still an issue. There's about 5 years trying to persuade them to. Had a few wins, but I wouldn't say there was like a moment where it all came together. But that has changed, and I am currently reborn into my innovation process and work. I put it aside for a while, which I'll explain to you why in a minute, I think now in hindsight. And then the second business I started with another person was a personal development business, which was and still is in our business, trying to make psychospiritual, developmental, self-transformational, enlightenment, integrating enlightenment, trauma transformation, cool, mainstream, and yet science-driven. So not abandoning science, not abandoning critical thinking. I thought they were two separate businesses, so we ran them as two separate businesses for about 10 years. One was called We Create, which is like collaborative, social innovation, purpose-driven, blah, blah, blah. And then the other one was this more personal development. Is that better? Okay. And we kept them quite separate, like we'd have, corporate leaders and Ashoka and UNDP people in one mailing list and branding world over here. And then we had another sort of going to festivals, going to Burning Man, running talks on consciousness, psychedelic renaissance, blah, 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 all over here. I then got to a point where I was now going back to being overwhelmed because I was trying to run two rich whole businesses that should be together, but they couldn't be because the world can see them together. And then I ran another business, blah, blah, blah. Tried so many things. I've got like a drawer of purpose-driven, disruptive innovation projects that have not yet been realized down here, metaphorical. sometimes I'm online and I'm on my own Dropbox. I'm like, oh my God, I designed a science for change makers program for MIT and I totally forgot even written it. Like I'm like reading things I couldn't even remember I wrote this whole thing. So I'm now collecting them in my little Dropbox drawer. Anyway, I then still kept doing innovation sporadically as and when there was someone enlightened enough to want to do purpose-driven innovation. But meanwhile, I'd realized that without a certain capacity of leadership, of inner consciousness, of resilience, strength, embodied wisdom, the capacity to influence, to tell stories, which we now call leadership work. Without all that stuff, no matter how good your innovation process and tools are, and I do believe what we have created is one of the world's most advanced programs for disruptive change, positive disruptive change in the world. Without the mindset and the heart set to hold it, to hold those moments of newness, to serve what's seeking to emerge without getting in the way of it, either our fears or our cravings and desires, to steward a system, to tell stories of the future that also create change right now, with our capacity to understand our own developmental challenges that are now blocking the system from transforming. Without all that stuff, the innovation doesn't work. So partly by being asked by companies and governments and nonprofits to develop leadership programs for them, partly through, I think, my own need to transform fully and integrate myself, not just to have the insight about all these different understandings of inter reciprocity, interdependence, stewardship, but actually live them, which has taken about 16 years to really embody. I only think I've beginning to have a vaguely integrated, embodied way of being in the last 2 years. Thinking I had it way earlier than that. Obviously, most people do. So I then had to go fully into the feminine to then develop a curriculum and a worldview and a self-modeling of the world as a transformational leader, as I call it now. So that now I'm now bringing the innovation back in, and I'm now able to offer ecosystem players, conveners. So that would be the non-profits, the development, the government departments, the supranationals, an entire approach to systemic innovation, disruptive innovation, purposeful innovation that's underpinned by practice, by leadership practices, wisdom practices. And it's now fully coherent. And it's like, wow, okay, this is what I've spent 23 years doing. Now I get it. Now's the time to stop creating and start delivering this at scale. So that's one move that's shifted recently. Bringing in some of this regenerative thinking, which we'll come back to, obviously, I'm sure, as a frame, because it's a very useful frame. And I've been seeking a frame for a long time. I used thrivability for a while, which was big about 10 years ago. Michelle Holiday and my dear friend Robin Lincoln Wood. It never stuck, really, apart from with a few geeks who love it. Everyone else was like, why have you made up a word? And what does it really mean? And I don't really like it. And, so regenerative has become, for me, a catch-all term for some of this stuff, which I'll explain in a minute. So then I went straight into the feminine, and now I'm in a place where I'm still running leadership programs. To be really uber practical, I am running leadership programs. I'm running change maker capacity building programs, which is also leadership programs. I'm running innovation programs, which are sustainable or purpose driven. I am also developing scalable solutions to these things. How do you deliver high-end, high-touch leadership and transformation programs? So 16 years ago, I created a peer-to-peer coaching kit, which is a huge disruption in the coaching market, in the therapy market, in the healing market. And I've done about 20 variations now, and it's now absolutely brilliant. So now I'm looking at where does that go into software? How does that translate into AI, into VR? When you take away the expert and it's peer-to-peer, suddenly everything becomes very different, but it also becomes very unsafe potentially. So you have to find ways to codify and make things safe. I'm a partner in a sustainability consultancy, working on net positive strategies and how you implement them in organizations, which is, again, I do the sort of people transformation piece of that. And then I'm discussing with another client, both that was an ex-client of mine and another ex-client of mine. We're looking at a systems change sort of convener lab, again, at scale. And there's a few other bits and bobs. So that kind of gives you a kind of overview, background.
There's a question on that, and
Yeah.
and then before I go into my summary, because I was trying to read that story in a simplified version so I can
Totally.
integrate it. But you said twice you went all the way into the feminine, but you didn't explain what that means.
Correcto. Let's do it. This is one of the most important things I've learned in my life, actually. So much so that I've just started co-creating a podcast with a woman who has also come to a similar point. And that's why I mentioned yin and yang, masculine and feminine. The integration of those capacities, I think, is part of the unlock for what happens next.
Okay.
So let me try and make that as simple and graspable as possible without losing it. So first of all, I'm going to try and give people an overview of what I mean by a regenerative change, regenerative transformation.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's fundamentally about that. And then we can go into a more Spartan, precise understanding of the feminine and the masculine, I think, from where I'm currently at.
Okay.
My own personal journey through these parts of myself and the world. So when I say regenerative, I see the future as the only future I see as being viable is if we can not just criticize the modern world, but fundamentally leave the modern world, taking all the bits we want, including, we don't want to break away and reject, including the modern world, including the pre-modern world, and find a new operating system for humanity. And what I mean by that is, so modernity for me is rational thought, technological thought, industrial age business models. It's the use of digital technologies at scale. It's also including the critique of itself, the critique of rational thought, the critique of science, which we call postmodernism. Most people call somehow postmodernism. It also includes the critique of power, and the culture wars that we're currently in around who has the power and the knowledge. For me, this is all modern. It's all the birth of this amazing intellectual thought that is free of ideology and dogma, whether from religious dogma or aristocratic dogma, or what I think it was Dawkins said, isn't it how funny it is that wherever we happen to live, be born, we believe that local theology is the answer to the truth of God, right? The truth of reality. So how do we, so modernity is that. Pre-modernity is sort of animism, tribalism, religiosity, often where some people are more powerful than others, and actually people lower down the hierarchy, hieros, a priest, ruled by priests. People lower down the hierarchy really do have a horrible, horrible time. The king could decide when you're, like you can in Saudi Arabia sometimes, you can decide who's going to die, live and die, arbitrary, based upon my myth, my stories. And then maybe even pre-modern, where we had potentially a more embodied, egalitarian, less intellectual worldview. We don't know what happened. Lots of people thinking about what happened back then. And I'm actually less interested in that than I am in what happens next. So for me, as long as we are in the world of intellectualism of any type, where we are trying to create a solution based upon words, no matter how brilliant those words are, no matter how critical thinking you get, no matter how meta-modern, post-modern, super-modern, post-postmodern you get, if all our lenses and frames come from the intellect, disembodied from our felt senses, our interoceptive experience, our heart's truth, as some people would call it, our gut's truth, our felt states, our out-of-word intuitions for what to do next. If all of our frames disconnect us from here down, even if we talk like I am now about interoception or somatic markers or felt senses or whatever, but we're not being guided by them in this moment, then we are in the modern still. No matter how brilliant the criticism of the modern, we are in the modern. So for me, the regenerative world or the transformed world, or I've actually been calling it meta-modernism recently with double T, as in compassion-oriented modernism. Meta as in loving kindness. We can only get to that place if we temper our cognitive complexity, our cognitive brilliance, which is a vertical form of intelligence, which many people have traced out in developmental theories, whether it's spiral dynamics, whether it's Commons, Masters type stuff, whether it's Piaget, whether it's Keegan at Harvard. They're all essentially forms of cognitive development where you can understand ultimately systems, complexity theory. That's all great, brilliant, carry on doing that. But I believe there's a horizontal development of human beings which has been underlooked because it's a function of the feminine. It's a function of care. It's a function of complex interactions and relationships where we have to find a way to care for ourselves and others in ever more complex groups, from one to a few to friends to, to whatever, to the system. Without that level of what we call embodied wisdom to temper the complexity of our minds, we end up still creating elevated, escalated, ivory towers, aristocratic towers that ascend up to genius, but they miss out love, compassion, tenderness, presence, in the momentness where all life gets played out. And I believe this regenerative future can only occur when we as individuals can come back into a harmony inside us between the clever and the wise. Let's just call it the clever and the wise. The brilliance and the presence, which means showing up for our kids, showing up for ourselves, showing up for our loved ones, showing up for our friends, showing up for our community, loving people we don't like, ... We can come back to it. Until we can do that and then use all the modern technology, the modern business plans, the modern scale structures, we'll just constantly create more of what hasn't fully worked for everyone. But I think for the first time in human history, are being offered this sort of inflection point. So people talk about the post-humanists, the people who talk about the singularity when AI becomes, or machines become more intelligent than humans, or humans have to merge into machines. This is their kind of inflection point. I believe we've got a different inflection point, which is where our capacity to solve problems at scale, which is what businesses have done really well, meets our capacity to love each other at scale, or tend to each other at scale, which means a whole lot of trauma healing, a whole lot of developmental unlocking, because it's really hard to do. And if that point can be reached, we can then use the technology and the business plan stuff that we've got, innovation. We can use all that to actually serve life-affirming, regenerative outcomes, where we put at the center of our structures, of our design, interdependence, reciprocity, wholeness, following the life force in a conversation in ourselves, not just the algorithmic, extractive, abstracted worldview that just wants to create efficiency and money and productivity. It's not about the money, it's about efficiency and productivity and whatever. That's what we're being offered. I can feel it. I can feel there's a pregnant capacity in the world right now. I think many of us can feel it. Because the crisis is so intense.
Yeah. Let me come in here for 1 second. Sorry about.
That's all good.
When you, I was thinking while I was listening that there is a sense of understanding a concept, a process of something, that when you first started putting lines together into letters and then those letters into words, that is not a process you can explain to anybody how you started doing that. And it has nothing to do with content. Right? It's a process. You learn how to parse the observed reality in a new way, and it starts giving you new information. And if I draw a line from that event that has happened to basically almost everybody in the Western world,
Yeah.
And to where you are at,
Yeah.
the way I read this now is that you've started to you've assembled over a lifetime, so until today, a lot of process to put together complex lines into complex letters to form complex words, to form complex sentences, etc.
Yeah.
And it's it has to be a participatory procedural moment. It cannot be a propositional kind of knowing.
Correct.
Right? You only understand it once you are there. You can never predict what it's like when you look at it. It's like death. You used that word before. You cannot predict how you feel about somebody's death until you meet it, until you meet that moment, right? And so if I understand correctly, you're trying to facilitate those moments of giving people the process to integrate more quickly all of that knowledge that's but without delivering content.
Más o menos.
Okay.
I will take your metaphor and I'll also see if I can nuance
Okay.
what I think I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah.
So yes, I believe that I've been creating / discovering, bracket it off and we'll leave it for later or another time, a grammar of transformation, or an archaeology or a map. And yes, it's got process, but it's also got practices and tools. And
what's the difference between process and practices and tools?
Okay, great. So we're getting deep into it now. So the process, for example, I wish I could show you some visuals because that would make it a lot easier. I might be able to share a screen actually.
Yeah, do it. It's open.
Okay, I haven't prepared any visuals. I'm just going to open a doc and I'm going to show you something.
Okay.
While I'm talking. So the process is like the pathway, the steps. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. Step 4, do this. So in my first book, I did a pathway for how you heal and transform yourself. It was 10 steps. Step 1, understand what a problem is. Great. A problem is an opportunity for transformation. A problem is the raw materials of growth. But define it in a certain way. Define it in a way where you own it and you can create possibility of it. And we have a tool to help you write that sentence. But that tool and that process point are not helpful if you've gone into fear, if you've gone into meltdown, if you're repressing. So there we have a practice for how to embrace a problem, how to be okay with complexity, how to be okay with not having the answer yet, because you haven't gone through the process to have the answer. So stop trying to have the answer now. But your part of your brain wants the answer because that's what you've been taught to do. So we're going to have to deconstruct you and your desire to solve. And we have a version of that for a kind of corporate leadership version of these. And we have a version for individuals who are saying, because just so we're clear, the leadership world, because the company buys it for the leader, we have not had permission from each person to go into their deepest psychospiritual truth, self, trauma, pain, suffering, potential. So we have to safify it and allow them to take it at the level they want it. It's been a long journey to do that. Same with the peer-to-peer coaching, because I'm not there, or a therapist isn't there, or my wife who's a therapist isn't there in the moment with these two people. We have to give them structures, sentence structures, sentence stems, finish this sentence, or whatever it is, tools, complete the bits in the middle of this sentence. I am feeling X because of Y. We have to create these meta equations of transformation that can be brought that people can bring to the place that they're ready to get to. And what I mean by that quite precisely is the part of them that we call in our work the connector, the inner guru, the inner shaman. We also call it create and connect mode for a bit more sort of modern flavors. That part of us all wants us to heal and be whole. One might argue it is consciousness itself, seeking wholeness in fragmentation. And it wants it at a certain pace and depth that our fragile ego, what we call the protector, is ready to allow some death, essentially, to allow some release. So some people are like, I want to go and I want to encounter my own death and the death of my parents right now. I'm ready. Others are like, I don't even know what death, I don't even know what that even means. And we have to be able to create these tools and practices for any level of capacity, essentially.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And I will also nuance something you said. Yes, I say to people, because we haven't lived through it yet together, or you haven't lived through it yet, I can't tell you what breakthrough you're going to have. I could suggest what I've seen before of a person like you or a company like you. But as you said, I can't predict it because the universe consciousness hasn't let you, the part of consciousness that you have access to hasn't released the old idea or the old feeling or the old habit yet. So it hasn't been able to listen to or hear what is seeking to emerge. What the psychologist Frederick Myers, who was a contemporary of William James, said, subliminal uprushes. You haven't had those uprushes yet. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have them, not me anyway. And yes, my intuitive sense as a teacher, intuitive leader, whatever, can sense a little bit of what that is. I can feel it in you a little bit. And I get little shots of what you're happening for you. I get it in me if I'm leading a process, particularly an eyes closed process where I'm fully guiding people through something. I get a little bit of it, but it's not my insight to have, so I can't possibly predict it. Likewise, a company wants to have the strategic solution before they've gone on the innovation journey. And this is what makes innovation different from McKinsey style, Bain style corporate strategy, where they say, we think you should do X because this is the right thing to do for the 2025, 2030. I'm saying, I have no idea what your business with its unique purpose, context, culture, history, geographical locations, types of people, business models, service models, operating models. I have no idea what you should be birthing into the world, but I can take you on the journey to get there. I can give you all the stimulus and prompts, and I can provoke you. I can love you. I can tickle you. I can cajole you. I can tell you you're naughty if you're naughty, if that works for you. And you will have the breakthrough yourself. And if you think you want me to predict it, we're fundamentally on a different journey here, which you can imagine for the corporate mind that has been taught to have the answer before the problem, because we've all been taught to have the right answer from school. It's a fundamental mismatch of mindsets, which is hilarious. That's why you need so much. That's why I've had to develop my own leadership skills to be able to take individuals and groups and systems on this journey of discovery. The one thing I will say is you can't predict, but you can preempt the potential emotional states and pitfalls of the process, because I've seen them so many times. So I can say to an individual client, it is likely if we do this process, this bit of the process where we're going to have death, you might feel either empty inside or full inside. You might feel dizzy. You might feel a loss of grounding. You might feel physically like you want to vomit. At a corporate level, you might feel that you want to shut down the project. You might feel, and I've got a whole slides on where I sketch out the likely journey. And the more I do that for people, the safer they feel, because they're like, oh, you get this, you've done this, you know what this is, So let me just, do you want me to share like a visual? Because this is going to help.
Yeah, let's go.
So the work I've been doing on my own with business partners, with companies, and then with my business partner and wife, Alison, has been to sketch out a theory of transformation, a process, a practice, and a tool set. We've called it biotransformation theory. So that is a theory of change, of lasting change, which we define transformation as lasting, positive, sustainable, and necessary change.
Okay.
Just to make it easy. I'm not saying it's the right answer. It's just a working definition, so we know what we're talking about versus change management versus a political policy change or whatever, right? And it's because most people try and do transformation without really knowing what they think transformation actually is, which is a fascinating thing to try and do. And we have a map, and then we have also in biotransformation theory the bio signals that we are basing this in scientific knowledge about biology, but also in, let's call it wisdom understanding of bios, which in Greek means life, was the original of life. So we've got not millions, thousands of years of knowledge about life from within us, what it feels like to be aligned or coherent or resonant, or to have an insight or to have an intuition, or to discern the moral decision to make now. So we have that is one part of bios, and then we have biology. Yes, Aristotle, whatever, but seriously, from about 300 or 400 years ago, we have an incredible knowledge base, which even the last 5 years has been transformed by new studies into testosterone, oxytocin, somatic markers, trauma, whatever. So that's the principle, and that's the theory. And interesting enough, all the tools, by the way, don't sit in the theory. They're born from the theory. They're not of they're not the theory. The theory basically now it's using my masculine mind, my abstracting precise mind, have created 7 principles. They were in my last book, but I've just been updated and evolved. So I'm currently writing a book called The Way of Transformation. Super simple. And it has these 7 principles in, which I'm happy to share. But the 7th principle is the map, the process. And it looks like, if I share, happens to be InDesign because we're developing it into a thing. Can you see that?
Yeah. Can you zoom in a little? Yeah.
This is the corporate version. So hold on. Now I've got. Did it share? Is it still sharing?
Yeah, it's sharing. Yeah.
Just brought up another window on my screen. Okay. So this is the corporate version. This is the safest version I know how to deliver. There are metaphysical versions I've got. There are personal versions, group versions, relationship versions. We call it the transformation curve for obvious reasons. But I can, as a way to practice, make this a bit more concrete, I can share some of the insights that I've learned from this. And by the way, this principle is still birthing for me new insights.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a feminine and there's a masculine aspect. There is a sort of apophatic negative path and a positive path. So you can map the Trimurti, which is Brahman, Vishnu, and Shiva on it. You can map birth and death. You can map all these different things. You can map growth curves of startups. You can map how seeds grow. It's a fascinating thing, and I've spent 15 years unpacking it and trying to write about it. So basically, at the simplest, you start on the curve at number 1, where you have an established way of doing, being, businessing, creating value in the world, living in your relationship, living in your life. And you start to feel that it starts to lose a fit with the world. It starts to become disordered. And that's that beginning of that curve, which for someone who loves transformation is super exciting. But for most people feels like death and terror, and they try and stop the process, repress it, park it in some part of their brain that doesn't work, deny it, blame it on competition, mixing personal and collective.
And a vertical axis is something.
The vertical axis you could imagine is order and chaos, essentially.
Order and chaos, okay. Sense of security.
It's chaos and cosmos. Okay. Is one way of looking at the or thriving, not thriving. Flourishing, not flourishing. So you'll see that unlike Theory U and other U-shaped curves, it's a J-shaped curve because number 8 is higher than number 1. Because if you do this process of transformation, what you come out with is a higher order, more complex state of the system, whether it's our individual biology or a global system. Another way of saying is it fits more with the environment. So now we're looking at things like the law of requisite variety or evolutionary theory. There's a fitness, but I actually use the word fittedness because we don't know what fitness really means. It's a tautological statement in evolutionary theory based upon an abstractive maths approach to evolutionary theory. And I much prefer the idea of fitted. It's not moral. It's just we fit the environment better. The environment changes. We lose a fit if we can't transform, and therefore we start to go down. But we can consciously choose to come back up. So there's a second version of this we call the breakdown decline, which starts off exactly the same. 1 and 2 are the same. But because we deny, repress, avoid, ignore, we continue to decline. And then we reach some kind of terminal state where we're either dead, or at company level, we're underperforming or bought by someone for a fraction of our cost, or at societal level, we're in collapse. And there's a bifurcation choice at some point, round 2 and 3, where we can either speed up the process and choose to come out and down and up, or we are just going on in decline. Now, another thing you can see is as we start to slip, if we start to slip down 1 and 2 and we're not conscious and we're not awake and we're not proactively transforming and leading the transformation, either at ourselves or at scale, what tends to happen is people try and go back up the left-hand side. They're running, trying to get up, which looks like at the social level, make it great again, make America great again, make my business great again, make my life great again, because I'm dying in my 40s. I'm dying to the masculine, and as a man, my feminine's rising, and I don't want that. I'm going to start buying a Lamborghini. I'm going to try and make my life like it was in my 20s. I'm going to go raving.
Or like me, I can give you a little anecdote for that position, because one day many years ago, I was standing on a bridge ready for a bridge swing somewhere in South Africa. So you're attached to a rope 40 meters it's fixed to another bridge, and you're dropping down roughly 40 meters and then swing.
Yes.
Okay, I was too scared to jump, so somebody pushed me.
Yeah.
And apparently I was while screaming and falling, trying to climb up the rope while I was falling.
Perfect.
But then I passed out and I was swinging when I woke up. Yeah.
I'm hoping you were harnessed in.
Yeah, it was.
A bit too much of a lifelike transformation curve.
Yes.
Absolutely. So you're trying to do this, right?
Yeah.
Another variant of that is the strong man. So if you're in Egypt and you're in the revolution, and then there's no one leading you through the reintegration, the rebuilding side, you're like, you know what? This sucks. Let's just get a dictator back in, or a strong CEO, or a private equity firm. And then the third variant of I call them the sort of anti-transformation tropes. The third one, which is very common, is the escape fantasy. If I go and live in Ubud, I will escape this curve. If I get out of my relationship, if I become polyamorous, if I go to work at Google because Apple sucks, we try and get off the curve, but the curve is ours. We are the curve. You can't get off it, right? Or if you're at corporate level, let's do some dodgy accounting, or let's acquire a new business. I don't know, whatever it is. At the political level, it's obviously clear, let's become Brexit Britain. Let's vote in a far right party. And yet, as we know, the arc of history, the arc of transformation, as Martin Luther King says, tends towards justice. This higher point is a more empowered, just state. I do believe that. I believe the universe somehow wants us to become more complex, more adapted, more fitted organisms and organizations. But the price it asks for is release of the old. So the curve on its way down is the release. The curve on the way up is the receive. And yet, until we learn about this and we learn the practices where we can release safely and love the release, we want to receive before we release. So we want the new idea before the old idea is gone. We want the new business model before we're prepared to release the old. We want the new boyfriend before
you can't breathe in before you breathe out.
Correcto. And often you might see this curve in another way, with the upside first and then the downside. But we put it this way very specifically because our experience, you enter the curve at the beginning of your life as a transformer, an expert, a master of transformation, with a problem that isn't being resolved by the old ways. I can't drink it away. I can't work it away. I can't clever it away. And therefore I have to enter some form of psychospiritual experience, which is this downside, this release. this death.
So when I map that onto the current situation of a global boom bust cycle of our
Totally.
species,
Yep.
then the most important question seems to be that how do we avoid going into the bust, meaning
Yes.
that bifurcation between at point three roughly,
Yeah.
right? Where how do we avoid that on a species level? I think that's what your work is pointing towards, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to go and have a 2 second. Well, I think that'd be overly egging. 2 minute bio break, as I
Okay,
heard someone
go.
say a second ago,
Yeah.
and I'll be back in 2 secs.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Ciao.
That was fast. Okay.
One of the regenerative world I'm moving into is wild bio breaks. So, and I mean that both tongue in cheek and actually quite realistically. The experience of regenerativeness shifts everything about you and your sense of the modern, particularly comfort and convenience. So I'm going to come back to this world of comfort and convenience. So
Mhm, mhm,
the version before this of the transformation curve that we've just gone on for
mhm,
300 years,
mhm,
roughly,
mhm,
was we've got these kings and priests who are telling us how to live, and meanwhile 99% of people are dying age 32 and all in a debtor's prison, or through some civil war in Europe that lasted eons, or the Black Death, whatever, right?
mhm, mhm,
I know if we let go of this attachment to this personal God of the Judeo-Christianic tradition, we and the belief that the king knows everything and has some kind of arbitrary power, we can let some new ideas in, which happen to be about democracy, reason, blah blah blah. This was the Renaissance. This
mhm,
was the Enlightenment,
mhm,
and we rebirthed, right?
mhm,
And all this amazing stuff happened, right up to full conclusion of it up here on number 8, is a vaccine that can be changed in 100 days to counter a variant that's just emerging in nature at a global level, with scientists sharing the DNA, no one owning the DNA code,
mhm,
universities pay research being used for some of the vaccine intelligence, a small company with a Turkish founding team collaborating with a massive pharma company, scientific collaboration at scale, getting the vaccine out to literally 1 billion people in a year, getting it so it doesn't have to be cold, fridging systems, nurses in my local thing jabbing me, an app telling me this is like the best version we've ever got of this modern world. It's amazing, right? I mean,
mhm,
I want to
mhm,
honor it. I don't want to ever
mhm,
say this is
mhm,
not amazing.
mhm,
And a whole bunch of people have been left behind who aren't convinced by this genius for various different reasons. In fact, I saw some research today that said people who live in pro-Trump counties in America, where they're voting for Trump is over 60%, have now a 2.7x probability of dying from COVID than those who live in a 60% pro-Biden county. This is amazing, right? To see that level of that's exponential. That's 2.7x. That's 270% more likely. And so we've got to this point where we've got all this amazingness, and we're also chucking out carbon into the air at a point where we cannot live in this planet with 9 billion people and the kind of weather and systems and the lack of food and water we're going to get. We've got a bunch of people who are just forgotten by globalization, and they're now upset and angry, quite understandably. They've lost meaning, deaths of despair, methamphetamine, depression, anxiety, murder, genocide. We've got a lack of equality, which is basically going to rock every. We've got culture wars. People do believe, don't believe. So we've kind of we've peaked on one side of the curve, and what I think we're now starting to feel is that we're also sliding now back into a new one. Some of us are excited by it. Most people are terrified by it, quite frankly, right? But there is a global cadre network, mycelium of people that you and I are connected to, which are seeing the opportunity of this, the possibility of this, right? We're innovators. And what I think we have to do is go on this at the level of society and at the level of enterprise and at the level of individuals all at the same time. So there's a coordination challenge I think consciousness or the universe is inviting us into, which is fascinating at one level. That's one piece of the puzzle, which I haven't actually articulated until this minute. There's a kind of fractal challenge. We've got to do it on so many layers. We have to do it in an organized way. We have to do it in some way at pace. We can't let it happen to us. We have to do it. And I think as we come up out of it at some point, and some of us are ahead of this than others. So I think people like you and I are probably at 5. We've got some of the ideas and the insights. We've got some design lenses. We've got some books. We've got some models. We've got some theories, processes, tools. We've got blockchain, We've got CRISPR. I mean, we've got some amazing bits. The ingredients, I think, are there. And in the end of my last book, I put it on Medium, actually. I've got an ingredients of what I call the regenerative renaissance. So I think from 4 to 8, I've called it the regenerative renaissance. Rebirth of our human species. We've got all the ingredients, or most of the ingredients. I think we can create most of the ones we don't have relatively easily in the next 10 years. I'm talking about technologies, tools, whether it's decentralized autonomous organizations, whether it's machine learning algorithms, that whatever. What we haven't got is the emotional and spiritual intelligence to architect them into forms that work. And that's what this process is designed to do. So that's where obviously you see the meta of what I'm trying to do. What I will say is the great uplift of modernity, once we kill God, as Nietzsche said, which caused us one problem, which is now what do we do? But the plus side of that was we got comfort and convenience at, let's say, a 4 billion person scale. And what I mean by that is modern business, and to some degree modern politics, is premised on finding discomfort and inconvenience. Whether that's traveling to see my grandparents in another country, whether that's getting a COVID and dying from it. We see discomfort and inconvenience and we get rid of it with a product at scale that creates billions of dollars for somebody back there. But because of that, also creates, as we know, ecological, social, political turbulence and in some ways decline.
And it maps onto negative liberties.
Exactly. Absolutely. And so what I think part of the curve between 1 and 4 is, and I mean this on my individual level as an individual person who loves comfort and convenience, I call it peak 90s. The peak 90s was EasyJet, flying around the world. It was raving 4 times a week. It happened to be my peak 20s, but I think we're living still in a kind of echo of this amazing time where we had second houses, third houses. We had as much food as we wanted. We had farm to table, blah, blah, if you're rich, not if you're not. And I think this curve we have to go down on is comfort and we have to be able to deal with discomfort and inconvenience. And I think the only way we can have people embrace that is to increase, essentially, connection, and like compassion, love. That kind of, and community. Those are the plus points of the future. The downside is you may never have two houses again. You may never be able to fly around the world 12 times in a year. There are things that have to die, and I have to be part of that dying as an individual as much as a leader.
Well, the discomfort might be a transformation of comfort, right? So the feeling of discomfort is more to do with letting go of comforts we like,
Exactly.
than letting go of comfort itself. It's just transforming into a new one.
So on the way up, between 5 and 8,
Yeah.
what you tend to do when you're birthing and you're getting the breakthroughs and the aha moments and the excitement, and you're like, oh my God, I love the spirituality, or oh my God, I love shamanism, or whatever it is, right? You're embracing something new, or I've got a new company. What you tend to realize is what you were so afraid of losing, you didn't need anyway.
Mm.
And therefore, that desire for comfort and convenience gets transmuted into a love of community and connection, for example, right? Whether it's co-living, whether it's peer-to-peer learning, whatever it is. That's the plus point of the future. We're going to have a lot of time for comfort, for community and connection. But I think we're going to have, even as a techno, I wouldn't say techno, I'm a techno optimist, but I'm not a techno fascist. I don't think technology will solve everything. And I don't think 9 billion people will have the lifestyle that I have or had 2 years ago.
So this curve is triggered by a crisis.
Or I would say it is a crisis.
Or by it is a crisis because it's a change, right? So
yeah,
so it's triggered by a challenge. And about an hour ago, you said something that's reminded me of a concept I was thinking of using as a intuition pump a while ago.
Love
which
that.
Which is a directed inquiry pump. So if you are curious, if you're naturally curious, constantly naturally curious, you tend to be able to move through this curve, because you've done it so often, and you know that there's a reward at the other end. If you're, for some reason, and that reason is quite obvious when you look at the educational system, are not naturally curious anymore, then you need a challenge that pushes you into a forced mode of curiosity to get you that you want to get out of that challenge, that place of discomfort that you're experiencing. And so while natural curiosity, just exploring randomly, has definitely its merits, it is also just random.
Yes.
So there is something, there's a merit in the directedness of the curiosity, the forced curiosity that helps you get out of your position of challenge. And this is why I call it a directed inquiry position, right? And then finally, once you are at point 8 in your curve, you're actually just one step away from the next point 1.
Absolutely.
Meaning it has to be a pump. You have to continuously do this.
You're doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we call them at the level of the individual, we call them developmental stages. Spiral dynamics, whatever. So I talk about major key and minor key transformation curves. So major key is like going from a 30-something to a 40-something, late 40s, midlife transition. That's a major, believe me, having just experienced it in all its depth and richness. It's a major key. Me becoming better at dialogical podcasts is a minor key. So that obviously it's all fractal and crystallized and mycelial, but you can sort of discern always in hindsight. Usually, that was a major. My God, I thought that was minor, but it was major. And yes, so our logo as a company is a reverse Kensho, the Zen Kensho, which is the curve which is slightly broken, and the brokenness is there for a reason, which is that's where newness comes in to the wholeness. That's the if you think about science, there's the complete causal closure of science with a full theory, and I believe we never will get to that point. Gödel said we can either be complete, we can either be complete but accurate, or accurate but not complete. And the Kensho says the design of the universe is there's wholeness and the move towards more and more wholeness, love, connection, compassion, communitas, and there has to be a break in the circle in order for novelty from the future. I conceive of it as I believe in entelarchy, which is the sort of arrival of the future in the present through our bodies, through our consciousness, through the microtubules in our brain, potentially. So this curve, this transformation curve, is actually a circle which is pulled out to architect it more clearly and precisely. But yes, we are always on a curve in every area of our life. We're either coming down or going up in our relationships, in our money, in our entrepreneurship, and company is the same. And it's a beautiful blueprint which you see everywhere once you understand the dynamics of it.
That is adjacent to something you said earlier about the marrying the spiritual and the scientific, right?
Absolutely.
There is a part of what you just said that I doubt can be coded in propositional knowing or science.
Correct.
And now that poses the massive challenge of confronting a whole society and individuals coming out of a society that is absolutely deeply primed in propositional knowing.
Yes. You can't square the circle with mind alone.
Exactly. So, yeah. but although an individual might have some sense of something is off,
yeah,
they still might not trust something that doesn't come out of a position of propositional knowing. Correct. That is just participatory in a sense, right? So, okay.
So for example, everything. I just want to loop back on a couple of things.
Yeah.
The reason I wrote a book called Spiritual Atheist is because there is no way to go from the atheistic scientific worldview to fully encode, as you said, in propositional language, in math, in algorithm, this process, because it's alive, it's bios, it's biodynamic. So another way of saying that is everything where you are now on the curve, everything to the left of it can be at least studied with the scientific method. If it's people and it's human sciences, you're going to get some distorted, you're going to get some research. It's not going to be absolute. Psychology, not going to be absolute. Because part of the problem of psychology is trying to use science to study inside. And part of my work to reconcile these is that science was created by Galileo, or he encoded the scientific principle of science is here to study what he called primary faculties or primary materials. Consciousness is secondary. Interesting that it was secondary. And science should never try and study those, as in the experience of smell, the experience, the conscious moments of sound. Another way of making that simple is science looks at your body from X-rays, MRIs, and it can only create a science of multiple instances. There's no science of one human being. There's only a science of 100. Consciousness and the wisdom traditions the gaze is outwards from the body out into the world. And there are a few people every now and again who go, we've got to bring this thing together. So Merleau-Ponty was trying to talk about the chasm between what science can tell us of an eye, for example, and what our eye sees out. So science can study the left side of the map. It can't study the right view of the map because it hasn't happened yet. There's no data of the future, as I like to tell my data scientist friends.
Mm-hmm.
And innovation, transformation, regeneration is fundamentally about helping the future. This is just language, but it might not be actually. It might be metaphysics. We have to discuss that. The future wants to emerge in the present through our human bodies, because we're the most complex organizing system known in the universe, as far as we know.
Apart from the entire planet. But yeah.
Well, I don't know at the level of complexity whether Gaia is more complex than the individual. Obviously, it includes the individual, so you could argue that it's a more complex holon of an individual. There's certainly no membraned organism that's as complex as we are, but we are the we are the Earth, we are the Gaia, on the inside. So I believe we all have a life where our transformation curves we're going on as individuals to love more, to be committed committed not to a place, institution, committed to a person, to be a parent, to have self-reliance, sovereignty, whatever we're working on, right? And there's intergenerational and collective developmental traumas and fixations and distortions which block it. So our individual journeys are also necessarily collective journeys, because we're all part of one thing, not two. So you have to be a non-dualist to be in this world. But you can't be a non-dualist that thinks non-duality privileges idea, the mind, consciousness from like an typical Indian point of view. You have to be what I call a dual aspect non-dualist, who believes there's only one thing, but it shows up as idea, consciousness, and matter always at the same time. So the best way I've got for showing that is the Mobius strip.
Okay.
One piece of paper, two sides, always two, always one. You can't go from consciousness anywhere and get to matter, but yet the flip side of consciousness is matter. You have to therefore be a panpsychist. You have to believe that consciousness exists in everything, just not at the complex levels that we have in our human experience. So then we get this capacity in the moment, in every moment, because we're somewhere on a curve in every aspect of our lives, to sense into, feel into, become reverent towards, listen deeply to, whatever the words you want to use. These are lots of new words people are using out there. What is seeking to emerge in the moment for my wholeness and regeneration, and the system at different levels of size and complexity of the world. So my transformation and regeneration fundamentally is the transformation and regeneration of the whole. If we don't get stuck in myopic, bliss-seeking, self-caring, psychospiritual worldview. And another way of looking at that is from a very interesting book that was launched at I think it was the first global ayahuasca conference in Ibiza I went to. And it's an book of anthropologists, published by Oxford University Press, about essentially ayahuasca shamanism in South America. And their multi-layered approach, multiple authors, suggest that, and this is certainly something that I feel is true from whether you're looking at Mircea Eliade's work on shamanism or core shamanism. Shamanism has always emerged in every culture as far as we know. We don't even know what we had to define it. But what it, for me, it's about this process where the individual is listening to what nature, the universe, consciousness wants us to do, not just for ourselves, but to align our tribe, our group, our collective with better fit with the outside world. Yes, that necessitates our own healing. So healing is part of this process, but it doesn't stop with our own healing. It then has to come out into our actions as leaders, entrepreneurs, change makers. And the classic modernist Anglo-Saxon world took one part of it and said, I'm going to use it for me. That's great, for my own revelation and worldview. And actually, it's a tool for the orientation of the whole to the changing, as you said, the changing environment. Because as you go from 8 to 1, which could last a year, 20 years, 100 years, or a day, I think, actually more realistically, you realize that whatever you've created somewhere else as a fixed way of operating, its fixedness is no longer working quite well. And we need fixedness, we need stability, we need structure and order. And we need that order to constantly be rebirthed. And that's one of the problems 20th century companies are dealing with, is we're fixed into ways of organizing that aren't working, and we don't know how to die. And so
just one second.
Yeah.
I want to dive in there. Can the order be the understanding that there is no order? So the question is,
I get the question.
as you're pumping your way through transformations, transformation after transformation, you understand that this is the order, and this is what you're holding on to, instead of holding on some point in the curve.
Exactly. So you start to become comfortable with holding on to the structure of the universe and how it works to enable transformation, rather than the particular business model, product idea, keynote thing you do as the structure. Because we need order. I believe the human mind needs stability and agility, right? So do companies. And actually, let me come into a second on how we think the brain now works and how any generalized artificial intelligence will have to work. But we get lost into thinking the order is the structure of the thing, rather than the structure of how life is. And when you can find stability in the process of transformation, not in the state you're in that moment, you find peace in amongst the chaos, amongst the edge of chaos, because you know there is order. It's just not whatever thing you have right now. That said, I do suggest every human being has a tolerance limit, an overwhelm limit, where if you're transforming in your life as a father, lover, polyamorous lover, entrepreneur, community leader, son, blah, 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 I think I can handle a lot, and I have to sometimes consciously slow down one bit and go, I know I'm on a transformation curve here, but I'm not going to attend to it for the next month. I'm going to attend to this over here, and be patient with this bit.
But isn't that then the next level, dancing with that?
Yes. It's a dance. Okay. It's absolutely a dance. It's absolutely a dance. And actually, I do believe, I put in one of my books that I think it was Nietzsche again who said, never trust a philosopher who can't dance, or something like that, which I may have made that up, but I do believe it's a useful thing. Dance, and Ali, my business partner and co-author of this theory, is a professional dancer, choreographer, whatever. I learned to dance in Africa from bottle store ladies, the naughty ladies of the village, who turned.
I need to let the dog out, so don't.
You
sorry.
Go. As we know, now we know who let the dog out. Learning to dance is not just a fun thing to rave; it's a attitude and orientation to chaos, to the edge of chaos. To be able to constantly find your stability again after a move, after a moment, after a process point, and to be with another or multiple others in the dance, but also on your own, to allow the music to dance you, which is really what I learned from raving, is to allow the music to dance through me. So I didn't get in the way of it, but I wasn't not it. I am it. I am the dance, but I'm also allowing the dance to come through me. And also, even, the term styling out we have in England, if you make a mistake on the dance floor, you find a way to turn it into something new you've never done before, right? A new shape. And the first time you do it, it might look a bit funny, but then the humor that comes with it, the meta-modern sort of serious irony, is powerful. And that's one of the reasons why I believe dance is both a practice for this. It's also an ecstatic practice, right? To get into a place where your brain isn't being held in place by the structure. And it's also, there's metaphors of waveforms, resonance fields. So we've long used music and movement within our practices. But we can go back into that in a second. I want to double click on something you said before, just to nuance something. I believe the curve starts when changes in our environment or our what I call environment. I don't like making up words, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
When changes in our environment or environment start to make the fit we have with either no longer work. And yes, it can be a discomfort or a sense of something's off. That's usually the first thing for me. Something's off. Usually we want to blame it on something. The start point of the personal curve, by the way, is own it fully.
Yeah.
What is off about me? And yes, if we don't listen, it becomes pain. If we don't listen, still it becomes suffering. And then eventually becomes burnout, breakdown, meltdown, death, whatever. But the word crisis, I'm sure you know, but not everyone listening may know. Crisis in Greek means a turning point. It's not bad or good. And you see on this curve, the crisis occurs as you reach the lower level. You get the choice. You know, transform, breathe into a breakthrough, go with the flow, whatever you want to call these different choice make moments. Or resist, repress, deny, blame, escape, drown it away in work, in being clever, in writing another book, whatever. There's always these little ways to block the process. But I believe in every moment there is pregnant future necessarily within us. Whether you call that innovation ideas, customer insights, regenerative nuance, shamanic felt senses, whatever, psychedelic breakthroughs, all different words for the same thing. Subliminal uprushes, where something is coming from under the curve and it wants to be birthed into the world. And the human being is the most conscious form for that to occur. Maybe Gaia is working with us in tandem, probably is. There's a kind of, for me, when I even repeat that, and I've been working on this curve for so long, the reverence and awe I feel that this is how our universe evolved, which is a universe of change. We know it's expanding. We know it's creating space for that. That's, for me, is one of the interesting points about the universe expanding, is space is created in that. Is what you use the word adjacent, what Stuart Kaufman calls the adjacent possible. It's constantly being expanded. And when you do innovation at the corporate level, societal level, whether you do transformation at the individual level or regeneration at societal level, it's the same experience. And you are both the transformation and you're the leader of the transformation. You are both steward and content. And it's an extraordinarily sacred and yet mundane experience.
So the way I look at consciousness, and I haven't read a lot of science about what science has to say about consciousness, but to me, consciousness seems to emerge out of the necessity of a complex biological organism to integrate its set points. Meaning, there is the rules of physics help a biological body to achieve its set points up to a certain level
of complexity and fit.
And at one point it has to start making choices. Now those when it starts making those choices, that's where where consciousness starts, to me.
I would say yes. The problem with talking about consciousness is it needs to be described before you can talk about it, and then describing it is a fundamental philosophical problem, the hard problem. It's all I say. It's the harder problem behind the hard problem. So I think for me, what I'm hearing you say is consciousness of consciousness.
Well, that's
emerges.
Okay, good.
Integrate information in more appropriate, varietal, interdependent ways, so that the organism can fit the changes going on in its outside and inside reality.
Exactly, that's where I was headed.
But I would say that consciousness itself, I believe, like back to the curve, I think consciousness is and matter are one thing, but we can never use matter to understand consciousness or consciousness to understand matter. Or we can use them, but we just have to understand there'll be a gap. There'll always be a gap, an explanatory gap or an empathic gap. And that allows for us to be both science lovers and spiritual lovers at the same. We can be both. We can go into both because we realize they're complementary, not contradictory. As long as you don't have overreach of one to the other. So an overreach of, we know what science looks like when it overreaches into consciousness, because it starts trying to tell us what we are and aren't based upon 150 white privileged kids in a Stanford research lab who are under some weird experimental conditions, because science only works when you isolate a variable, one or two variables. So you've got to get rid of everything else, but you can't really because they're people, but you try and pretend you can. And then a little paper gets studied and says, we think this. That's the best science can do on consciousness. And it's a bit of a category error, as Ryle, the philosopher Ryle said, but we can get some interesting things from it, definitely. Then we have the problem that science tries to bridge the is to ought chasm. And that's the chasm between the two sides of the paper. So David Hume says, science can tell you what is, it can't tell you what ought to be, because what ought to be is what consciousness is. It's what we want to be, what we think is fitting, artistic, moral, good, beautiful. And science can't tell you any of that stuff because those are all secondary qualities. Science can just tell you what is in primary qualities. Your nerves look like this. Vaccines can do X. It doesn't tell you whether we should use vaccines or not. It just tells you vaccines can do X. Consciousness has to tell you what is moral, what is good, what is beautiful. It can be refined and developed, definitely. That's what the practices are there for, is to get our bullshit distortions and fixations out of the way of our discernments. But if consciousness tries to tell you what is in an atom without science, we're going to get a lot of weird subjective narratives. Fine, could be interesting. And actually, I believe they work together, that consciousness tells the scientist an idea, a vision, an intuition, a breakthrough, a flash. And then the scientific part of them goes and studies it for 3 years. Quite boring, actually, if you've done it. And then chucks out a couple of papers and wins a Nobel Prize 20 years later. They're constantly working together. And we live in a world where you think you have to become one or other. You can only do one or other. And it creates what's it called the double bind, Gregory Bateson. And then we have the schism, as I had, as a science lover who thought that meditation, yoga, love didn't really exist. It was all like a fun illusion. Or you become a new age heretic. Not heretic is the wrong word, sorry. A new age sort of conspirator who thinks that fill in the gaps, that science is somehow whatever. But I do like the science that tells me my quantum consciousness workshop is really good. So I'll take that science. And I like the science that has my mobile phone let me put my crazy thoughts into Telegram. That science definitely works. But the other science that those guys are doing doesn't. It's like, guys, science is one process. It's fallible. It has issues, definitely. Scientists like to think it doesn't, but it does. And it can only tell us about physical stuff. It can't tell us about consciousness. But it's the same process that's being used at every level in science. Más o menos.
The rain in the background.
Yeah, this is the storm coming in. So you use the word choice. I put another slide up here, which is the bifurcation point, right?
Okay. So
the old will dissolve. This is the wonderful, wonderful things about the universe. It will dissolve the old. Whether it's a metaphor, a metaphorical meteorite killing the dinosaurs, or whether it's our own bodies, decay will occur. And part of the modern world is to try and fight decay and to fight death, which is fascinating. To fight dirty, rotting leaves on the floor of the jungle. We don't want that anymore, right? But dissolution will occur. The choice we get with this architecture is we're either doing it unconsciously or we're doing it consciously. And one can arrive in a transformation and one arrives in death. Yeah, we don't want to see our society, our species die, I don't think. And I think we can get on. I think the seeds of the future are always stored in the rotting soil of the past.
Well, it's a hope, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes that does not happen, right? I mean, so many civilizations have not been able to let those seeds grow, and
exactly. They
and
got in the way of themselves. They couldn't let their own civilization die.
yeah, but this at the moment this is a one-time shot, right? When
Right
the
now,
Roman
yeah,
Empire collapses, well, that's part of Europe. Who cares, right?
yeah.
But yeah, seriously, but right now, yeah, it's the whole globe, it's the whole planet, and if honestly, I would be extremely embarrassed to be part of a species that couldn't save the situation on their home planet and just hop off onto Mars. Um, I'd rather stay here and work things out or not.
That's yeah. The Mars is an escape fantasy cop out. It's trying to get off the curve. That said, the universe opens up multiple curves, right? There's not just one. And if you miss the train, too bad. Your transformation is finished.
Mm,
The universe will pop another one up and another
mm,
one and another
mm,
one.
mm,
But they do have different outcomes. So if we don't get our proverbial together to go on this journey as a group, which we may not,
mm,
there is no guarantee.
mm.
There will be another transformation. It just might be a species transformation because we wipe ourselves out. I am pretty sure the Gaia will exist.
Me too. Yeah,
It might just have 100,000 humans on it, or none,
or a couple of yeah. Okay. Huh?
or a couple of a couple of billionaires and a venture capitalist in New Zealand. What it may not have is a 9 billion person world that's functioning at scale.
Yeah.
But I do believe this process, this architecture, and the other principles within it give us not a hope that is a faith, a hope that is structure, a hope that is tangible and concrete, because we can do this. I would give up and go into a corner of New Zealand if I thought we couldn't do it. It'd be
Mm,
much more
mm,
comfortable and convenient for me. I think everything's open, everything's available. I really believe everything's available for us in this moment.
mm.
50 years, I don't know. My almost 13-year-old son expressed to me quite a deep lack of hope that we'll make it.
Okay.
An existential lack of hope that is already tough on a 13-year-old, right? But
Hmm.
we didn't have to have the consciousness that our species may have already gone past the point of this life. But maybe as we said, maybe the life where we have more connection and community will be a better life. I think it probably will be because we won't have all the mental health challenges, I think, and the loneliness and stuff.
Hmm.
We just may not have central heating all day long. I don't know, making it up. I don't know what we're going to have.
Well, the most important principle, it seems to me, is letting go. You said that earlier, um, because if I look at
Yes.
the enormous curve of success coming up from a few 100 million to almost 8 billion in a couple of 100 years, more or
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
Um, there was something right that was happening, right? Otherwise, that would not have happened. At least
Absolutely.
for, let's say, 10% or a quarter of the world of the population. Now, if I look at what the most essential principle of coordination in that phase was, I think it was all about centralization. Centralization of knowledge, centralization of so, for example, through IP law, through patents, through universities and gatekeeping into those universities, things like that, or into being able to publish papers. So
Yeah.
a lot of gatekeeping around the knowledge centristic, and but the same for decision making. So even if you're in a democracy, I mean, we don't have to make that point about an autocracy, but even in a democracy, it's very, very centralized. Um, the same is true for financial um, uh, uh, potential. So money accumulates in certain places. So there's a lot of centralization going on there. So if you look at that as the leading principle of the success, it you can from that point reason that once this hits a wall, the whole system hits a wall, that same principle will be also the principle of the demise. So we have to change that as a core principle. And you referenced that earlier. It has to do something with distribution, not decentralization, distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Let's talk about this. Is a huge. So I'm going to actually slightly disagree with you, but only by nuance rather than fact, reality, if you know what I mean. So if you can see this thing here, I think institutions were what created the core, the center, nation state, the what do you call it? The East India Company in India, whatever. Centralized institutions, brilliant, right? Everything's just all over the shop in this tribal operating system. Institutions came along, and there were rules, there was structure, there was hierarchy, there were pyramids, there were buildings, there were capital cities, capita, head, and it really worked. It lifted a lot of people out of horribleness and survival. You know, if you're a Hobbesian, I think the bit that then got added to with the science piece is this truth to find, competition to beat thing. As you said, it was the freedom to write a paper. And not, so if you think about Oxford and Cambridge circa 1280, it was a religious institution where you were here to learn Aristotelian thought. And then up popped this science thing, and then people were like, well, I don't want to think that stuff. I want to think about this thing, and I'm going to publish it, and you can look at my data, and you can look, and then we're going to know that thing. Well, I'm going to know it. Hopefully I can persuade you to know it because you can look at my data set. And at the same time, we had a mirror of the individual entrepreneur, businessman, leader, creator, designer, the craft people of, I don't know, Munich, London. They were going, you know what? I can do a better table. It's going to be even more beautiful than that table you had. So you have these two beautiful things, which now we know are dysfunctional as well at scale. They're pathological. Everything has shadow, right? Everything can get fixated and stop transforming. That's the problem with the core. Is it tries to freeze it at a moment where it works for the 3 people at the top, or the 5 people in the Illuminati. I'm only joking. Or am I? I don't know. And it became rigid. And then we started to think about the brain being the core, right? So I talk about the core rather than the center, but for me it's a similar metaphor. And what we're learning from the brain in the last 5 years is, so when I was at medical school, I was taught that the vagus nerve, the wandering nerve that comes down, the main nerve that comes down from, we were taught down from the brain, telling the body what to do. Most of it we now realize are actually afferent fibers going up from the body to the head, telling the brain what to do. We now call this proprioception, interoception. These are all the words for the sensing the body does, which tells the brain what to do. But we also do have a top-down predictive mechanism, which most AI type transhumanists think is the central prediction mechanism. But it's only, I think, half of the problem, half of the organizing system of the brain. And so we get prediction going, hold on, you did this last time, or that's a baddie, don't like them, they're bad. All the biases, so you get prediction, you get in the moment interoception, and then the insular cortex makes what I call a middle out decision. Top down, bottom up, middle out. I've got a diagram of that somewhere. And I think what's happening at the level of human organization in the desire for self-organizing, or companies, teal, DAOs, participatory, blah, 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 is we're starting to realize that too much core, no bueno for us. Not enough divergence, diversity, newness, novelty, empathy, participation. But if we go all the way to participation, which we may be able to do in 100 years or 1,000 years, I don't know, like the mycelial metaphor, what we end up very quickly usually is some kind of bullshit. We get what I call in one book the tyranny from below rather than the tyranny from above. No, what do you think? What do you think? I want to get consensus. I want you to like me. We want to be together. And then meanwhile, the world's over. So there's a beautiful clip that I use in my collaborative leadership module of Ken Loach film. I don't know if you know him. He's a sort of British socialist filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And he did a movie about the Spanish Civil War. And there's this amazing scene where the participatory amalgam of different groups have just taken over a piece of land. And they're all sitting around this circular table, all having equal say over what they do. Shall we make it in all the land is one, the left wing arguing over how consensus can occur and distribution and what Jordan Peterson calls a forced flatness, or Ken Wilber, forced flatness. Meanwhile, the super organized centralist Franco's forces are just bombing them and killing them, right? So I think it's a mistake to go fully participatory. So I'm always trying to guide people with, if you think about where we're at, though we might look like we're at the edges, we're actually at the core. We're at the core of human thought. We know lots of people who we're not really at the edges. We're at the edges of the core, but we're at the core. And the way I put this for an organization is you need people at the core who are paid to be systemic complexity thinkers, who can run huge innovation programs, who can look at regenerative stuff, whatever. And that's what their genius is. And you have people at the edges who are serving on the front lines, whether it's taking care of sick patients, whether it's on the phone lines of a company, whatever, building stuff. They're at the edges. They're taking insight in the moment from the outside, the environment. They have enough agency to solve problems at some level at where they're at, self-organizing. We want to build their resilience, build their coachability, build their blah, blah, blah capacities. But we don't want them to have to think. They have to think 20 years ahead every day while they're serving on the front lines. But there's a way to feed their insights, their ideas, their complaints from customers, whatever it is, to the core, where the core people can involve them in a process at good points, plus some other people and some collaborators, whatever, and move them along a transformational process. And another way of saying this, my sister's an HR director for a non-profit that works on the front lines of people with severe neurophysiological illnesses. Most of the people who are carers don't want to have big thoughts every day. They want to come in, purposefully serve people, and then go home and spend their time with their family and do other stuff, right? The mistake people make is that the core or the edge of the right are better value. They're just different. They serve a different function in a complex web. Now, if you can help, so there's another thing here where I try to draw this in a book called Become a Transformational Organization. So I basically got to this point. You can see this. This is the two dysfunctions of the world. We have a dominator hierarchy where the customers and everyone's serving the investors. And we have a chaotic network where everyone's trying to solve their own problem themselves, trying to innovate 12 versions of the same thing, which happens even in the most amazingly organized companies. They don't even know each other. It's amazing. And what we want, I think, is something like this, where we have a generative hierarchy where purpose is the boss and everyone else serves the customers, the citizens, the end users, the problem holders. Plus, we have some kind of cross-functional self-organizing network where purpose is orienting us. So we have resonance and coherence. What I haven't cracked yet, my new but dear friend Thomas, is what does this look like when it's together? I've got it from the view of a biology where we have top down, bottom up, middle out. What I don't have is what's the visual model for this, because this is mycelial on the right. The best I can think of is a tree, and I don't want to always harp on about trees, but I do love the fact that the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, the tree of wisdom pops up a lot. Because the tree roots we know are mycelial, pulling in carbon, other stuff from other trees, from mycorrhizatic fungi. But there's some the trunk is super structured, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a hierarchy. When the leaves need the carbon, bring the carbon up. But then the leaves are also bringing down the chlorophyll, the energy, back down to the roots. So there is some metaphor there. But I don't think either or of these organizing systems work without the other. And that's why I think the brain works with the body. We are an embodied brain. We're not just a brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we didn't need our interoception, we wouldn't have it.
I fully agree. So with distributed, basically was in my understanding of it, I was referring to the co-creative network, to the mycelium type of communication, anybody to anybody.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Capacity highly distributed.
Absolutely.
And the only thing that is the things that are necessarily helping the mycelium, as you say, to create coherence, is some sort of a purpose.
Yeah.
And in your tree metaphor, this is a need of growth in the leaves, for example. So there's a signal that tells them that, right? So now that's the real question, right? Where does the purpose come from? Where does that emerge from?
Yes.
Does that have to be a centrally organized process?
Yeah.
Or is that something that can emerge from the network itself? And I would argue that it can.
I would too.
Given the right process, that just makes explicit what is already there. Because what I see in my experience with, I don't know, hundreds of conversations with people all over the globe, different demographics, not only the 10% of the core that we're part of, but everywhere. If you ask people, if you could re-envision and reimagine and dream up how we live, everybody comes up with the same kind of image. And so I think that we carry that within us already. It just has to be made explicit, and it needs to be allowed for, and then we can let it emerge, even if it's if it has different expressions in different parts of the world for different groups of people. But since if it's
absolutely,
if it's transparent and it's permeable, people can navigate towards what attracts them into their mode of being, while being interconnected with everything else towards the shared outcome.
So I wholeheartedly agree with one caveat.
Okay.
First, I'm going to wholeheartedly agree. I believe purpose, if you had to define it in words, even though it's an embodied feeling, is love in action. That's the human language I use. I then believe love is the human word we use to describe interconnection. Interdependent, interconnection, interbeing, if you like that, whatever, right. So then necessarily what is actually purpose in you and purpose in me and purpose in Naresh in India and Carlos in Brazil has to be the same field, attempting to bring wholeness, reciprocity, I won't always say fairness, but some kind of, I'll just say with wholeness. With competition working too. This is not all a big love off. I believe we have two systems which are always working, the survival system and the thriving system. And a tree has both. It wants to survive, and it will mess up other trees to do that. It will kill its own children trees, apparently, right? But when it's not in survival mode, it wants to be bounteous and have flowers and leaves and give to other trees, right? So necessarily, if we can orient around authentic purpose in us in every moment, it will birth the seeds of the new way of living, organizing future for us in our particular place, which may be different for you in Berlin versus it is me in Brighton versus it is in my friend in Marin County. But there'll be a commonality, right? Because it's co-living, it's co-working, it's all these things we know we want, right? But with different expressions, local expressions. So we've got another word for that people are using is cosmolocal. So we want to have all the joy of networks. This is Cosmo, fully Cosmo, but we want to live local and be local and execute local, right? Well, so that's kind of one thing I totally agree with. However, in our current state of consciousness as a society, the burden it puts on the individual to be able to listen to that in the moment, heal all the wounds they've had, which stops them obeying and listening to that truth. The trauma that has to be cleaned through, whether it's mine, but also my family's Holocaust trauma, whatever. The addictions I've then got on top of the trauma that have to be rewired. My fear of death and blah, blah, decay and conflict, inconvenience. All that is so much that I find it every day almost too much for me. And I've expanded my vessel to the biggest vessel I know how to expand, right? My capacity for conscious action. I don't think we're there yet. But I think that's where we're moving towards. That's why I think that we need a kind of hybrid solution, which honors thought leaders. I think you put on your email this morning to the group, the early mainstream, the somewhere between the chasm between the early adopters and the early mainstream. That's where I think we're at. You and I are geeks. We're in a group of geeks. We know each other through these geekery and we love this stuff. Our job is to find the early mainstream. Meanwhile, the other 90% are struggling to get food on the table, deal with 3 children, negotiate this over controlling state, not die from COVID, blah, 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 whatever. And I don't think we're ready for fully self-organizing systems. And I can tell you that why I know that, because even the most advanced people I know, when they go into a co-living or co-creative project, things very quickly fall apart, even if they've been amazing for 30 years staring at a wall, feeling Buddha consciousness or whatever it's been. And then you meet someone else and you're like, oh, I thought I was enlightened and now I'm dealing with stuff like when I was a 6-year-old. Can I share something with you which is hot off the press?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the last year, Ali and I have been trying to look at what this looks like, this what we're now calling relational fields. I'll do the summary version. Okay, this is probably a good version. Okay, I don't know why that's gone down there. Did I finish this word? I don't know if I did this. So, so I don't think we're there yet, because we still have the issues of patterning, addiction, freeloader problems, all that stuff. We haven't worked that out yet. But I do agree that at some point we might emerge into, where did I have that slide I had up for a while? It's an old slide. It's not fully accurate. We might emerge into network OS. So you can see purpose to co-create is the somewhere between enterprise and network. And we might find our way in our lifetimes to a fully self-organizing network, mycelial, rhizomatic is the word I'm using at the moment, way of organizing when we've done all this inner work ourselves. But I still run a pretty much generative hierarchy in my projects because I've learned that the coordination costs of engaging in full co-creation can only be done with like the super, I won't say the Ubermenches, but you know what I'm saying. Too much in that term. So then we get to this thing where in field 1 is our relationship to self, universe, and the universe in ourself. So these are 5 fields of relational complexity. And just so you know this, but not everyone will, field 5, which is sort of the system, cosmos, then loops back into system field 1 again. It's it's a torus. So it's a expanding loop, but then it's the same again somewhere. So it's just made up. All this stuff is made up, but there are 5 fields of discernment we think are very useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just live take away the overlap. I've just put some thoughts in here. This is probably no, this is not the best version. I'll just stick with the simplified version. Okay.
Good.
I'm going to duplicate this and get rid of the words here because they're disturbing me. Okay. So we spend our first few years of enlightenment, personal enlightenment, realization, trying to get ourselves right with the universe. Heal all the things we thought the universe should have given us but didn't. Heal our issues with God, Christ, Buddha, whatever. And that's where most people think enlightenment finishes. That's it. I'm now at peace. But the problem is then we have to have actual working relationships with people in field 2. These are our parents, our dependents, and our intimate partners, where the real work begins, right? So I wrote a subtitle of a book. I never wrote the book, but it was called, the subtitle was called Flow Job, Why Your Lover is the Only Guru You'll Ever Need, right? Then you get children, and then you realize your children are the only gurus you ever need, because they'll show you everywhere where you've got dysfunction, and they'll find every possible trigger you still haven't resolved from your relationship with your partner. That then is a fractal echo of field 3, which is our kind of friends, co-workers. Then we've got field 4, which is the one I personally have been working on for the last 6 months, intentionally bringing my attention to healing my relationship with people I don't really know or may never know, and trying to be less in-group and less, polarized in my views of the bad people. So this is like loving Trump supporters. This is loving people who are telling me my videos on YouTube suck, whatever, And then we have the whole field, the whole system. And this is what I was telling you earlier is, I think, the horizontal field of development. So the vertical field, as we know, you will know more than many. The developmental theory stuff is here, this sort of stuff. So you've got logical through to systemic through to integral thinking. I've decided not to focus on that bit because I don't think it's the bit that needs most attention in the current problem we have. I think the current problem we have is that we don't know how to be in these different relational fields to unlock transformation. And I would say this is even more so of the intelligentsia, who can birth a new system idea but can't bring their friends into it, can't feel the woundings. Yeah, Karen.
I would argue that moving through these fields affords also the growth on the other axis.
So thank you. I haven't got the slide to show you, but I have a hypothesis I put in my last book, which I called the threshold hypothesis. That I've got a slide somewhere, but it'll take me a moment. I don't want to bother getting into my slides to find it. It's in a presentation. But if you go to here, I don't think you can get, so that's disruptive thinking is like the Elon Musk. I think you can get up to around that level without much relational intelligence. Likewise, if you're like a guru or love therapist or whatever, I think you can get to a number of levels of relational complexity without having a kind of logical, systemic thinking intelligence. I think there then is a cleverly designed, not by God, but emergent threshold where you can't go into systemic integral thinking without deep relational intelligence.
Yep. Okay. Makes total sense.
You may be able to talk about it, but you can't really do it. You can't create systemic change. Likewise, you can't really care for an entire system if you don't understand systems. Nice. If you're a guru who just understands love, I'll tell you why I know this partly is because my wife and I have I came up in the world through the vertical. She came out in the world through the horizontal. She went dancer, choreographer, healer, mother. Was always interested in systems thinking, but had no education in it. So during the 10, 11 years of our togetherness, I've taught her everything I know about complex thought, complexity science, complex thinking, solving problems at systems level, innovation, how companies work, all of it. And she has taught me, but also healed me by her love and her craniosacral therapy, like a double whammy, and modeling what presence looks like as a parent. She has taught me how to expand myself to field 3. And then we're now going on the journey literally together, like we giving our little peer coaching on our field 4 projects we're both working on separately and together.
Okay.
Because I don't think we can do field 5 properly until we've done that. So that's why I think my development will only be unlocked at the level of a systemic change leader when I've healed field 4, of which this is kind of part of. This, I would say this is a field 4 engagement for me. And hence why I didn't do what my masculine mind would want to do, which is I'll give you an hour for your podcast to promote my work. And actually what we are in is a deep relational experience.
Exactly.
Where I've just let go of my rest of my day.
Yeah.
Let go, right?
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for letting me speak endlessly about things that turn me on, you know. So yeah.
It's a blast.
It's been a blast. Yeah. I just feel like I popped out of it in this kind of moment in the last 10 seconds, right? This is where the life force, purpose, the flicker inside us all in every moment tells us when it's enough.
Yeah. And but also it told you to be in here, right? I mean, you're not the only one in that position. We all have to somehow deal with life, right? I've had this conversation, for example, with you know him, Daniel Christian Wall.
Yeah.
He's obviously he has the same concern, right?
Totally.
Dude, I need to earn some money, right? So I how can I spend time here? But at the same time, we're all aware that it's the weaving of these connections of the thoughts of the people, and this is why I think this is important and adding even more value than just a linear podcast.
Absolutely.
This is not going to appear on any podcatcher, but this is appearing in a web of conversations that people can actually search
and bounce between and find. There's so many things you just said. I would like to, if you've got a bit more time, there is some things to unpack there.
Yeah, go ahead.
One is the dialogic process, which encapsulates dialectic, you know, Hegelian dialectic, but includes a more participatory, embodied sense. I can only go so far as an author in the core, right? I mean, I don't know why I said it in such a funny way, but authorial, creating this complex cathedral of awesome transformational processes and tools. Obviously, I do it with other people, and I test it every day with actual humans who are not interested in all this. They don't want to know how the car works. They just want to drive the car, right?
Yeah.
And I find it hard to create newness without this participatory dialogical way. I also don't believe without the weaving, you can't fully embody and embed it. You can just speak of it rather than speak from it. So in the 45-minute podcast, of which I've done many, it's a linear masculine experience. They want X, I want Y. It's transactional to some degree. At the best ones, we do have a little bit of chat. They've actually read a book of mine or an article or something. There's something for us to, you know, bounce around. And the life force flows. What we're doing is different. Now, in a full dialogue, you and I would just be talking from nothing and finding, there's a little bit of even in this, there's a bit of core and a bit of edge, right? There's you are asking me, Nick as author, download some stuff to us because we want the transcript to have some stuff. We want to see where you're at with your thought, right, and your journey. And I'm going to interrupt you and get you to go here. If I was unresponsive to challenge you, provoke you, if I didn't have anything to say, lure you, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. And
so through the weave that we're weaving together and you're weaving with all these other amazing humans, then there's also the embodied weave that you and I are now experiencing together as we weave our trust levels together so that when we want to do a project, we'll have more of that relational wholeness. And I'm weaving with Daniel through this.
Exactly.
So the mycelium as a whole is now pulsing at a level that it wasn't or couldn't from the linear podcast.
Correct.
And if we're too feminine horizontal, then no one will listen to be able to find the podcast. It won't sell any of my books, so I won't be able to write any more books. I'm making a joke of that because books don't
and it was probably an interesting chit chat between and for you and me.
Yes.
But of lesser value to listeners. So this is why I try to keep my mouth shut as much as possible,
right.
Which is a challenge. But to unpack and maybe sometimes assist you in unpacking deeper.
Absolutely.
What you're doing, right? So that's
so what Adriana and I are doing, and I think we'd like to come back to you and weave with you.
Okay.
So Adriana, I met through the Greg Henriquez group email list. She's been working in the Rebel Wisdom space for a bit. She's gone on her journey of being the sort of mother healer, now popping into intellect and systems and stuff. So we've connected around the masculine and feminine, which we haven't fully chatted about, and maybe that's what we can finish off with. The weaving of the masculine and the feminine together, which her and I have been independently going on our own journeys, individual and in our work, and now in some kind of podcast. There will be an actual podcast bit, but we also want to do what you're doing, which is, so say do a recording like this, and then something came out. Let's now get Daniel into a 3-way to explore, double click on that thing, and then let's get someone else who doesn't agree from another thing you did or something I did, and that can then, so maybe what she and I are weaving, which by the way we might actually use the word weaving in the name of it, of the content idea, can weave into your weave, bringing a different group energy but value, while still having that generative hierarchy where there are boundaries between your world and my world, and your brand and our brand, whatever. That's why I think it's important not to go into full rhizomatic flatness, because you lose the semi-permeable membranes that cells need to survive, even when they're in a bacterial collaboration.
Almost exactly the same image came up for me, right? So we need membranes in order to discern between organisms.
Absolutely, and to create chemical
shields,
radiance, blah blah blah, to make movement occur. You can't have movement without form and without discernment. Often I say on stage, if you just had a bicep and no tricep, there would be no movement. If you just had the masculine without the feminine, there can be no evolution. Because the feminine births in us all, I'm not saying women, but the feminine births from a flatness, from a participation, from love, from relationship.
And
the masculine lifts and elevates and ascends and guides. And then you see that in parenting. The mum takes this is totally nonsense, but traditionally the mum will have a bigger role in the first 10 years, the father a bigger role in the next 10 years, right? And that's actually played out by science. There is science in that. And I'll give you a very personal journey. And I don't think if I shared with you my poem called The Sacred King.
Yes, you did.
Okay. So I've been working on this idea of, so I'm basically regenerative everything guy, regenerative X. Regenerative masculinity is a masculinity, a maleness or a masculinity that has rerouted itself back in the feminine after many years in its masculine warrior or intellectual form, where it's realized that the most powerful form a masculine body or male feeling body can take is to be strong in service of the sensitive or purpose, productivity in service of purpose. So the balance between the masculine and the feminine has slightly gone from even 60% masculine, 40 to 51% feminine. Love, purpose, connection, care, compassion. But our masculine power, whether you're man or woman, masculine power of form, structure, ascendance, piercing, conquering, provoking, protecting, providing, is in service of that love. And I think Daniel and myself are probably very similar. I am a provider to my children. I'm the only provider. My wife makes some cash, but it's not enough to keep this family engaged. Right now, I am rebirthing myself after lockdown, myself after midlife crisis, my company after a difficult period of people not buying a lot of stuff that I sell. The last thing anyone wanted the last 18 months was leadership and innovation, although they need it, they don't want it. So I literally am now, by taking this time with us together, it's not with you, it's with us, it's with in relationship, is 2 hours I won't spend sending out productivity, protection, provision. But I'm absolutely clear to myself that without this relational complexity being grown, all my masculine genius becomes brittle and stale and inflexible and ultimately suffers. And and this is regenerative for me, and it stops me from just becoming who I was when I was 24, set my first company, which was, startup man. And that's not who I am, and not what the world needs, right?
Couldn't agree more. But this is such a huge topic and world to unpack that I think we have to leave that for another day.
I know. If you're up for it.
Yes, I am. I am actually thinking of looping my wife into that, because she's doing a lot of work on the feminine side.
How about this? Two invitations for us to mull over. How about my wife and I come in with you and your wife?
Okay.
To have a four-way. Now I know 4 is quite challenging, but one of the great things about my wife is she is happy not to say anything. But I will be encouraging her to step into her masculine.
So you'll have the same challenges I have today.
I will step into my feminine and receive and hold space, which you'll be able to judge how successful I am afterwards. She will step into her masculinity. At the same time, I would love to invite you into what we're doing, which we haven't started yet, alone or with your wife, for us to have your view in our masculine and feminine topic that we're sort of going big on.
Totally love that.
Codename the circle and the line, but we don't know if we're going to stick with that yet.
It's great. I love it. It's a lot to play with.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yes, I'm in. Both.
Perfect.
Let's find some time.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. I'm feeling very, just to meta for a second to close up my experience. I'm feeling exhausted, but in that kind of when you've just gone on an amazing run kind of way. It got really sweaty actually. You could see me pump up into my most elevatory masculine.
Yeah, but keeping the balance. I could see the balance.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. And I feel really connected to you in a way that has become fresher. We've only spoken 3. It's our 3rd time, 4th time, something
like this. I'm not sure. Yeah.
We have multiple connections that we want to explore. I'm very excited by that. I had here from a previous notes from another call, hope circled. I had. I've reminded myself how hopeful I am in this very suffering-filled world. And I'm really grateful and felt privileged to have been invited into your space.
Thank you so much. I feel very, very similar. It's been deeply inspiring. I really am in awe at the language and the images you have been able to construct to bring across these complex images.
Thank you.
I learned a lot, and I actually have to re-listen to this to really integrate. Yeah, seriously, integrate everything I've learned. That is really, really beautiful, and I'm hopeful too that there is something that emerges out of this. I was actually seeing the four stamps on my screen, the wives and us, and you and me on mute, just listening.
But
That would be
present,
awesome.
present and
Yeah, of
listening
course, of
and
course.
and serving
Yeah,
is so beautiful. And that's
yeah,
the king.
I'd
That's
love
the
that.
king archetype.
I'd love that.
Love it. Well, send me a scheduling link, and
We will do that.
we'll do it.
We'll do that. I'll coordinate, and then I'll send you a link.
Perfect.